Vinland Saga Season 2 has been one of the best experiences I think I've had with anime recently. Coming off one of the best prologues in the form of Season 1, it had a lot to prove with the absence of some of its more iconic characters it established in Season 1. It seemed difficult to reach those same heights once more. What it managed to do though couldn't even be classified in those simple terms. Season 2 of Vinland Saga exceeded every expectation I had for it and showed me one of the most endearing journeys of growth in our main character, Thorfinn. It gave Thorfinn his arc of understanding and validated his journey so far. The conclusion of this season finally freed Thorfinn from all his shackles, ready to start his journey to Vinland. Thorfinn's journey in Season 1 started as a young angry child and concluded in Season 1 in about the same way too. He grew up as a cold-blooded fighter but was just that little immature child that we knew from Season 1. Finding himself as a slave at the start of Season 2 is where Thorfinn's real journey starts. A broken Thorfinn found himself working away on a farm to one day achieve his freedom from slavery. Only then do we learn that this version of Thorfinn is truly empty. Having no goals or aspirations of his own, his life was merely passing him by. After the death of Askeladd, there was no reason for his existence anymore. Most people here would try to find their purpose elsewhere, but for Thorfinn, he didn't grow up the same way as most other people. All he knew was his revenge, and never once did he slow down and look around at the scenery. There was still so much to learn. In this season of Vinland Saga, Thorfinn learns some of his most important lessons in his life. Through the countless battles against countless enemies, he'd learned countless new things, but this season he had started building himself towards the ultimate goal that he had forgotten all along. Until he remembers the most important lesson of them all. He had no enemies all along. あんた方は俺の敵じゃない。俺に敵なんかいない。It's a damn shame that the season started out with the part that made so many people disappointed with it, because it was this part of the season that made it all come together in the end. Our introduction to the cast with Einar, Arnheid and Thorfinn, as well as the whole farm dynamic with Ketil, was definitely a crucial part in having those heartfelt moments later on in the season. I'm sure if you actually watched the season, you'd have no doubt about that fact. If you really boil down this season, it was about Thorfinn escaping the farm and setting off to Vinland, but if you really think about it, the reason it was so special is because of everything else that happened in it. The real reason these moments managed to hit as hard as they did was because of the setup it managed to create in the first part of the season. I mean, if you really think about it, the early part of the season was particularly important in highlighting the slave and master dynamic on the farm. Ketil was portrayed as a progressive slave owner for his time and objected to overly harsh punishment for his slaves. He even gave them the opportunity to have their own land and farm to pay off their status as a slave. The retainers, however, weren't as kind as Ketil, being stuck in their old traditions of treating slaves as objects and forcing their superiority all over them. It intentionally made the audience feel safe around Ketil. It's the feeling of, as long as these characters are on Ketil's farm and not another slave owner's farm, maybe there is hope for them. Because Ketil was shown as someone who actually cares and treats his slaves as humans. As soon as the audience started getting comfortable in that feeling though, it spends the rest of the season breaking down that very image of Ketil itself. As the layers peeled away on his character, we learned that Ketil is nothing more than a coward. One that couldn't stand up for himself when the times got tough. He didn't object to harsh punishment because he treated his slaves like humans, he just couldn't stand the sight of someone getting tortured in front of him. He looked at his own son Thorgil and felt fear towards him. The Iron Fist Ketil, who treats his own slaves with respect, suddenly didn't look all that forgiving and tolerant anymore. The cracks had started to show. At the same time, on the other side, we saw Thorfinn and his own internal struggles. The guilt of killing eating away at him now that he had a moment to sit back and think. He'd realized just how much harm he's caused in his life so far. Young Thorfinn was a child, and due to extremely unfortunate circumstances and a very strong desire for revenge, as well as a lot of anger, he was drawn down the path of war. I have to admit, seeing him in season 1 living and breathing for the sake of his own revenge was actually kind of frustrating to me. Like, yeah, okay, he could fight, he was a badass, but it's that feeling of his own life being wasted on something pointless in the grand scheme of things. Revenge is obviously not what Thors would want him to do. That obviously wasn't the point though. As much as I say that I was frustrated with him in season 1, that is in no way an insult to the quality of Vinland Saga. Thorfinn was truly in character during the entirety of the first season. His actions made sense for a boy his age. This was his journey. Had he not been doing what he was doing in season 1, his own realizations of his wrongdoings just don't hit as hard in this season. That being said though, season 2 was where I expected him to grow and mature, and I was definitely glad that that was what it was all about. One of the strong points of Vinland Saga in this aspect was how it managed to portray the emotions and trauma. We saw this with Thorfinn trying to climb out of his guilt, Canute trying to control the curse of the crown, and even later on in the season with Gardar and Arnheid in their final moments. It was these small moments in the anime that really made this season complete. It isn't just an introspective into our characters, it's actually a portrayal of their emotions, and it's to a level that I don't think I ever even expected. The way these scenes came in the anime and just slowed down and really let the feeling simmer was truly just a beautiful thing, and I think that was really important in conveying those emotions to us. While the plot itself was fantastic this season, there is no doubt that it was these moments that managed to hit the hardest, and I think this season of Vinland Saga definitely nailed them all throughout. I have to mention the obvious here, at least it's the obvious to me. These scenes no doubt existed in the manga too, and I'm sure the emotional impact of them was probably somewhere close even in the manga. That being said though, I think there is no doubt that the anime surpassed those feelings. If not only just by the overall tone and voice acting, but even the sound design in these scenes was so beautiful. It isn't necessarily a diss to the manga as a genre, it's just a praise to the anime for taking the content from the manga into its own genre and heightening it to give the maximum emotional impact. Back to Thorfinn though, I think his emotional journey was truly just fantastic. It was also that much more important that he managed to learn all the important lessons himself. He learned a lot of new things on the farm, and with that came to a realization of what mattered to him the most. He understood the harm that comes from violence and what it takes away from others too. That being said though, he also learned that he couldn't just stand still and be a punching bag. When it came time to protect what was dear to him, he chose to fight and make himself useful in those situations too. The whole arc of Arnheid and her husband had some of the saddest moments in this entire season. Their backstory combined with the fact that Gardar was being hunted made it very clear that it was doomed for Gardar all along. I never did expect Arnheid to meet the fate that she did though. Ever since the moment of Gardar passing was so beautifully portrayed, I thought that was where the arc of Gardar and Arnheid had ended. I've already talked about it once, but what Kettle did to Arnheid was truly and utterly messed up. Arneid's death was one I definitely did not expect at all. Just when I thought it was all over, Vinland Saga pulled a fast one and killed off our beloved Arnheid, who'd been such an important part of the season so far too. Although even her living would have been just as difficult, as it was certain that Kettle was not going to let her go. Kettle's breaking point was set up early, and when he finally broke, it was truly shocking just how badly it all went down. As far as character arcs go though, Arneid's one started in season 2 on a sad note of her being a slave, and somehow ended up ending on an even sadder note than that. Which I'm pretty sure that Arnheid dying was what sealed the deal in Thorfinn's mind. I couldn't emphasize enough that when he realized he wanted to get away from the violence and the wars, the words of his dad, Thor's, and everyone else from his childhood came naturally to him.
大海の向こうにヴィンランドという名の土地がある。そこは暖かく豊かで、奴隷商人も戦の炎も届かない遠い地だ。
Our young Thorfinn had finally grown up. This was his arc of maturity, and it was delivered in one of the best seasons in all of anime. The words themselves didn't mean that much to him as a child, but now they are some of the most important pieces of knowledge he has. He finally understood that he had no enemies. Even while confronting Canute, the literal king, he understood the meaning of those words and understood what it is that he can do in that situation as himself. Run away. I think it was a moment of humor on its own in the anime, but the decision that Thorfinn reached is actually really telling of what he'd learned so far. Being a skilled fighter on its own doesn't protect the people he truly cares about as long as there are wars and violence around him. No matter what, there's only so much one person can do on his own. Recklessly fighting back amounts to absolutely nothing. The only real option Thorfinn has on his own is to run away. Finally, he can sail to Vinland. I guess you could call this season the saga till Vinland, as it was basically everything Thorfinn needed to actually understand to seek Vinland out himself. Since there is a season 3 confirmed, I'm sure the next season will actually be a saga in Vinland at the very least. That being said though, if season 1 was the prologue, then this season was definitely one of the best successes I could imagine for the perfection that we had in season 1. Everything about this season was fantastic. Whether that was the execution of the plot or the visuals or the sound design, I think the season of Vinland Saga was truly perfect in every aspect I could hope for it to be. Which I think is about the right time to mention that the title isn't really meant to start any debate. I'm just a guy expressing my sheer love for season 2, and I've just watched one of the best things I think I've ever watched. It isn't really meant to draw any comparisons between Vinland Saga and any other anime or even its own season 1. I will say though, this season was just a different kind of flavor to what season 1 of Vinland Saga was. I think that was appropriate being that way, but I just thought it was a cool title, okay? I really like this season. Anyway, as usual, thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.